Shabbat Shalom. The High Holyday season is embraced by changes in our prayers. At the center stands the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with its distinctive nuskaot, chants, and melodies, and poetic additions. We already sung one this morning. Ki anu amecha ve'ata Eloheinu. And around that center, the sound of the shofar every day, from Elul to Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of the season, and at the end of Yom Kippur, the festival Nusach of Sukkot, the petitions of the Hoshanot, the lilt of how we read the book of Kohelet, and the special ark openings of Simchat Torah with their fanfare. But the widest of the circles doesn't have a set tune. It stretches from the first day of the month of Elul all the way up to the day of Shemini Atzeret after Sukkot. And it is the practice, the sacred practice, of saying one psalm twice a day, every day, making a total of 100 recitations. And that psalm, that poem, is Psalm 27. It doesn't feature in our liturgy at any other time of the year, but at this point of the year it is central. And so I want to take a moment or two to explore it this morning and try to answer the question of why it is that out of all of the 150 Psalms in the book of Psalms, our teachers chose this one to mark this season. So this is by way of a little bit of text study. It's in the Siddur conveniently. If you want it in front of you, you can find it on page 113. 113. And while you're finding it, to study is a mitzvah. To study together with this many people in the room must be a really big mitzvah. We bless on mitzvot, and so I invite you to join with me in the bracha for study. The same as the bracha for candles, except for the last three words, which are la'asok b'divrei Torah. So with me, if you wish. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And may our learning be for a blessing in the world. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask this poem 5 questions, and by the asking of those questions, we hope that it will reveal its secrets to us. We're going to ask who. Who are the characters in the poem and how do they relate to each other? We're going to ask when. When is the poem set in time and in place? We're going to ask when. Does the poem rest in time or is it outside of chronology? We're going to ask why the poet wrote the poem. And lastly, we're going to ask the what question. What do we take with us and how are we changed by our encounter with this text? So off we go. The first question we're going to ask is who? And if we look at the poem, we read it through, we'll see that we have here a speaker, the protagonist of the poem, speaking in the language of I, and God, the divine, and a complicated relationship right from the off. There's a shape here. It all starts very well. The speaker is confident, and while apparently they have enemies all around them, they feel safe. God, to this speaker, is mighty and protective and illuminating, and all is well until it isn't. In the middle of the poem, as it unfolds, we hear the speaker expressing a wish for greater safety and greater intimacy, and the middle of the poem begins to fill with images of house and home and sukkah, and shelter. So despite the bravado of the beginning of the poem, something is not right here. Something has gone mysteriously wrong. And in the final third of the poem, we find out what it is. This speaker feels estranged and afraid and terribly, terribly alone. And the language here is of abandonment and violation and vulnerability. Especially poignant is the line where the speaker wishes to be carried by the divine because they have been abandoned and forsaken by their parents. And that gets us to the last line. And in the last line of the poem, we have complete ambiguity. The first word of the penultimate line in the Hebrew, lule, is dotted. And whenever you get a word that is dotted in the Torah or in other Hebrew text, it's a signal that that word has gone out of focus and that the meaning of everything is wavering. We couple it with the final line of the poem and we realize that the speaker is desperate. They've come down to their last thread, kaveh, kava, kav, tikva. They're down to their last thread of hope, or as a friend of mine would have put it, this speaker is living on their last shredded nerve. The divine in the poem seems to be constant. A light, a rock, a stronghold, a house, a shelter, the means to find good in the land of the living, but the speaker is forever in process. So let's leave those thoughts there while we ask where and when. The poem refers to a temple and a stronghold, but it's clear that the speaker, wherever they are hanging in an elsewhere, at a long and painful distance from what they yearn for. And the same is true of the time stamp of the poem. Within its reality, there is no time. There is no past or present or future tense. It looks as though this turbulent, sometimes certain, sometimes adrift relationship is the speaker's daily reality. The setting of the poem is inside the soul of the speaker and inside our own souls as well. That, I think, is the key to why the poet wrote the poem. It's not so much about the speaker as it is about us, about our internal reality. So it's to draw attention to our impermanence. The Hasidic masters point to the vision of Ezekiel, that the holy beings flicker back and forth. Achayot, ratzov, vashov, they say, to express how the change inherent in us means that we cannot be always in one relationship with the divine. We are ephemeral. We are impermanent. We flicker in and flicker out. Or perhaps the poet wants to remind us that even in the midst of all that fluctuation, our human task is to wish, to have faith, the chutzpah of hope. Even if we are fuzzy and we wobble, even if hope is fading in and out of view, we must identify it and try to place it as our guide. These two themes, impermanence and affirmation, are the DNA of the High Holyday season. Anu basar v'dam, we say, over and over again in so many ways. Avinu malkeinu, we're human, we're transient, we are fragile, we are vulnerable. Look for that theme in the prayers of the High Holydays and you will find it repeated over and over again, that we are ephemeral. And twisted around that fragility is the language of hope. You open the gates to those who knock for repentance, we sing. Ki anu amecha, surely we are your people, we sing. framing our relationship with the divine in more and more intimate ways. And our first act, traditionally after the end of Yom Kippur, is to go home and hammer the first nail into our sukkah, where we will sit and, despite being exposed to wind and weather, commit ourselves to joy. Look for hope in the prayers of the High Holydays, and we find that everywhere too. So we have two answers for why this psalm and why now. It is speaking to our impermanence, and it is speaking to our hope. But there's one more. And I want to share it with you in the name of the person who taught it to me. He's an English lawyer, a barrister. That means that he wears the robe and the wig. He's a member of New North London Synagogue, and his name is Gerald Rabbi. And he pointed out that this is a processional poem. It's sung over and over as people walk around a holy space. And when you sing something on repeat in that way, you tuck the end into the beginning. And when you do that with this psalm, imagine rolling it up on itself and then reading it again. Something very interesting happens when you do that. You get a circle. Hope becomes manifest in light and help. Light and help begin to vanish into a wish for home. The wish for home takes us to a place of absolute fragility, and out of the fragility once more comes hope, and with hope, assurance, and the circle repeats over and over again. Just like the circles that embrace the holiday season, just like the Hoshanot where we ourselves walk in circles, just like the rolling of the scroll on Simchat Torah when we tuck the end into the beginning, the pattern of the High Holydays is the pattern of this psalm. And yet, these circles never go quite back to the beginning. Not exactly. Think of the diagrams that we learned of the solar system when we were in elementary school. In school, we learned that the planets orbit in circles, ovals, I'm told. Mercury nearest to the sun, then Venus, then us, and so on, circling and coming back to wherever it was that they started out. And that's what the diagram says they do, but in fact, they don't. I am fortunate in having a rocket scientist to consult on this. My roommate is a retired rocket scientist, and she has confirmed for us that the solar system is not static, but dynamic. Yes, the planets orbit the sun, but they have not always been in the same position that is so familiar to us from those diagrams. There may have been planets that existed but were destroyed early on in the life of the solar system, and some of the planets that we see today may have migrated inwards or outwards. In other words, the only pattern is change. And it's the same in this psalm, and it's the same in our lives. We try, but we fail. We get up again and keep on trying. We're certain for a while, and then not so certain. We have faith, and then we lose it, and then we rediscover a thread of hope. Whether it's the shape of our lives and our relationships, or our successes and our failures, or the cycles of the planet, or our striving to answer our deepest held questions, or the process of teshuvah itself, everything is always in change. And that is why Psalm 27 belongs at this time of year repeatedly. Not to tell us that we are fragile, although we are. Not to tell us that we must hope, although we must. but to remind us that everything changes and we can change too. We can. Always. We just have to read this poem every day to remind us of that truth. Shabbat Shalom.